Hi everyone, I'm Julia and I tutor GCSE and A-level Maths, and today we're looking at factorising quadratics. This is a key skill that will show up all over your exams, especially at GCSE and definitely more A-level. So today I'll guide you through 5 questions, each slightly trickier than the last, with little tips and tricks to help you feel confident. Let's get started. So for the first question, what we want to factorise is x squared plus 5x plus 6. So for this type of question, the first thing you want to look for is two numbers that will multiply to make 6 and add up to make 5. So to help you find those numbers, let's just start by listing the factors of 6. So we know that we've got 1 and 6, as well as 2 and 3. So we can tell that the only two numbers that will multiply to make 6 and add up to make 5 are going to be 2 and 3. So now the best thing to do is just write down the two numbers that you've just found. So we've got positive 2 and positive 3. So now all that's left to do is place those numbers into our factorised form. So every time you factorise a quadratic, it will look something like this. Bracket x, other bracket, and then another bracket x, and the last bracket. So now all we need to do to complete this question is place those numbers in. So we've got x plus 2, as well as x plus 3. And there we go, that is the first question complete. Now let's move on to question 2. Okay, so for question 2, we're looking at factorising x squared minus 7x plus 12. And this question is slightly trickier as we do have a negative number in the middle. However, we'll look at how to factorise this in just a moment. So in this case, what we're looking for is two numbers that will multiply to make 12 and add to make 7. So let's start by listing the factors of 12. So we know we've got 1 and 12, as well as 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. And as we can see, the only way to make minus 7 is by doing minus 3 and minus 4, which will give us minus 7. However, if we do minus 3 times minus 4, we will also get plus 12. As if you multiply two minuses, they simply cancel out and make a plus. Okay, so now that we found both of our factors, all we need to do is place it into our factorised form. So we already know that for every quadratic that you factorise, it's always going to end up in this form. Bracket x, bracket, and then bracket x, and the last bracket. So all that's left to complete this question is placing that minus 3 and minus 4 into the bracket. And there we go, the factorised form is x minus 3 and x minus 4. Before we move on to question 3, I just wanted to show you a neat little trick that I like to use, which will help me know what the signs will be in front of the two factors in our brackets. So the way I like to remember this is if the last term is a positive, as it is in this question, then both the signs in front of the factors in the brackets will be the same. So you'll either have two pluses or two minuses. However, if the last term is a negative, then both signs will be different. So you can have a plus on this side and a minus on this side, or you can have a minus on this side and a plus on this side. Okay, so let's remember that if the last term is a positive, both factors will have the same sign. However, if the last term is a negative, then both factors will have opposite signs. Okay, so please don't worry if that does sound a little confusing. We'll be using this in the next 3 questions, so hopefully that'll clear everything up. Now on to question 3. Okay, so for question 3, we're looking at factorising x squared plus x minus 6. Okay, so this question is slightly trickier as the last term is a negative. However, we can use the little trick to give us a hint on how the factorised equation will look. So we can see that our last term is a negative, which means that both our factors will have opposite signs. So one of them is going to have to be a plus, and the other is going to have to be a minus. Okay, so let's use that to help us find two numbers that will multiply to give us minus 6 and add to give us plus 1, as there is a little invisible 1 just in front of the x. However, we don't usually write that in algebra, so you can just assume it's there. Okay, so let's start by finding the factors of minus 6. So we've got 1 and 6, as well as 2 and 3. Okay, so we can clearly tell that the only numbers that will multiply to give us minus 6 and add to give us plus 1 are going to be 2 and 3. We also know that one of the factors is going to be a plus and the other is going to be a minus. All we need to do is figure out which one is going to be the plus and which one is going to be a minus. So let's start by doing minus 2 plus 3, which gives us positive 1. And then what we can also do is minus 2 times 3 will also give us minus 6. Okay, so now that we found our two factors, minus 2 and 3, all we need to do is put this into the normal factorised form. So as we now know, every quadratic will factorise into this form. Bracket x, bracket, and the other bracket x, and the last bracket. So let's just place our two factors, minus 2 and plus 3, inside our brackets. And there you go, that is question 3 all factorised. Let's move on to question 4. Okay, so for question 4, we're looking at factorising 2x squared plus 7x plus 3. So this question is slightly different as we do now have a coefficient of 2 in front of the x squared. So with questions like this, I like to use the AC method. So all that we need to do to use the AC method is represent the coefficient of each term using a letter. So for example, 2 will be represented by A, plus 7 will be represented by B, and plus 3 will be represented by C. And we do the exact same thing when we use the quadratic equation. So the first step of the AC method is to multiply A by C. So if we multiply A by C, which is 2 times 3, and that will give us 6. Okay, so we can now represent the 6 as AC. So for the second step, all we need to do is find two numbers that will multiply to give us AC and add to give us B. So in this question, B represents 7. Okay, so to find two numbers that will multiply to give us 6 and add to give us 7, all we're going to do is start by listing all the factors of 6, just like we did in the first three questions. So we can already tell that we're going to have 1 and 6, as well as 3 and 2. So now we can clearly tell that the only two numbers that will give us plus 7 are going to be 1 and 6. Okay, so now plus 1 and plus 6 are going to become our two temporary factors. So now, moving on to part 3 of the AC method, all that we're going to do is rewrite B using these two numbers. Okay, so let's go ahead and rewrite that just down here. So we've got 2x, as in the original equation, and now we're going to add our two new factors that we found. So we've got plus 1x and plus 6x, and then at the end we've still got plus 3. So step 4 is literally just splitting the new equation in half and factorising each side separately. Okay, so let's split the new equation into 2 down the middle and factorise each side separately. Okay, so I just went ahead and quickly swapped around the 6 and 1 just to make the factorising slightly easier. However, it really doesn't matter which way you do it, you will still get the same answer. So let's start by factorising on the right hand side. So factorising 2x squared plus 6x will give us 2x, bracket x plus 3, and then factorising 1 plus 3x will simply give us plus 1, bracket x plus 3. Okay, so at this point it's really important that you go ahead and check that you have two repeating brackets. So in this question I've got x plus 3 and x plus 3 again. At this point, if you do get two different brackets, it's really important to go back and check your workings out in case you've made a silly mistake. So for step 5 of the AC method, we can just write down, check that you have two repeating brackets. So now for the last step of the AC method, all that we're going to do is place everything into its factorised form. So the way that we do this is we just collect all the terms that are not inside a bracket, so we've got 2x and 1, and place those in the first bracket, so that gives us 2x plus 1. And then we simply put whatever terms are repeating in the brackets as our second bracket, so that gives us x plus 3. And there we go, that's question 4 all factorised. Now let's move on to the final question 5. So for question 5, we're looking at factorising minus 3x squared plus 10x minus 8. So this question does look slightly harder as we do have a negative in front of the coefficient of the x squared. However, there's a very quick step that will make this question look just like question 4. However, before we move on to that step, we're already given a hint. So as we know, since the last number is a negative, we know that both factors will have opposite signs. So one of the factors is going to be a plus and the other is going to be a minus. This is a great hint to have, as once you've done your final answer, you can always use this as a little bit of extra reassurance in your exam to let you know that you've done the question right. Okay, so now let's move on to the first step of solving this equation. So the first thing that I'm going to do is factorise out a minus 1 just to get rid of that minus 3 in front of the x squared. So let's put minus 1 outside of the massive bracket, and then inside you're going to get 3x squared minus 10x plus 8. Okay, so this is now the new equation that we're going to be using the AC method on. So just as a reminder, the 3 is the A, the minus 10 is the B, and the plus 8 is the C. So let's start by doing 3 times 8, which gives us 24, and that is our AC, and our B is minus 10. Okay, so now all that we need to do is look for two numbers that will multiply to give us AC, which is 24, and add to give us B, which is minus 10. Okay, so let's begin by writing out all the factors of 24. So we know that we've got 1 and 24, we also got 2 and 12, we've got 3 and 8, and we've got 6 and 4. We can clearly tell that the only two numbers that will multiply to give us 24 and add to give us minus 10 are going to be 6 and 4. However, we can also tell that it's not going to be positive 6 and 4, it's going to have to be minus 6 minus 4, which will give us minus 10, and minus 6 times minus 4 will give us 24. Okay, so now that we've got our two temporary factors, we can move on to step 3 of the AC method. So all we're going to do is rewrite b using the two new factors that we've just found. So make sure to remember to write that -1 just in front of the massive bracket, as it's really easy to forget that -1 in your final answer. So let's write out 3x squared, and then instead of minus 10x, we're going to write minus 6x, minus 4x, and then plus 8. Okay, so now moving on to step 4, we're just going to split the equation down the middle and factorise each side independently. Okay, so now before we factorise, I'm just going to put that -1 in front of the massive bracket again, and then factorising 3x squared minus 6x will give us 3x bracket x minus 2, and then factorising minus 4x plus 8 will leave us with minus 4x minus 2. Okay, so now for the final step of the AC method, we're just going to put it into its usual factorised form. So we'll place that -1 in the front, and then the first bracket will consist of the 3x and the minus 4, which gives us 3x minus 4. And then the second bracket will just be the repeating bracket that we got in the previous step, which in this case is x minus 2. Okay, so that is question 5, all factorised, and I really hope that helped make factorising just a little easier. And remember, start by checking the signs, and if A is not 1, then use the AC method. If you want more tips or videos on GCSE or A-level maths, hit subscribe, and don't forget to leave a comment if there's any topic you want next. I'll see you guys in the next one.